Hi, welcome. Here we are, BFG time. And I'd like for you to join me on page 48 on the chapter titled Snozcumbers. That word reminds me of a familiar word. Reminds me of a word that right. What vegetable is that? The delicious cucumber. But as we know, snozcumbers probably aren't the same thing, as things in giant country are quite different than they are here. So without further ado, let's jump right in and see what all this snozcumber business is all about. Page 48. But if you don't eat people like all the others, Sophie said, then what do you live on?
That is a squelching, tricky problem around here, the BFG answered. And this slosh-flunking giant country, Happy eats like pineapples and pigwinkles, is simply not growing. Nothing is growing except for one extremely icky-poo vegetable. It's called the snozcumber.
The snozcumber? Cried Sophie. Well, there's no such thing. The BFG looked at Sophie and smiled, showing about 20 of his square white teeth.
Yesterday, he said, we was not believing in giants, was we? Today, we is not believing in snozcumbers. Just because we happen to not have actually seen something with our two little winkles, we think it is not existing. What about, for instance, the great squizzly scotchhopper?
I beg your pardon, Sophie said.
And the rascal?
The what?
Sophie said. And the crumpscroddle?
Are they animals?
Sophie asked. They is common animals, said the BFG contemptuously. I is not a very know-it-all giant myself, but it seems to me that you is an absolutely know-nothing human being. Your brain is full of rotten wool.
You mean cotton wool, Sophie said.
What I mean and what I say is two different things, the BFG announced rather grandly. I will now show you a snozcumber.
The BFG flung open a massive cupboard and took out the weirdest looking thing that Sophie had ever seen. It was about half as long again as an ordinary man, but was much thicker. It was as thick around its girth, as a preambulator. Now that is called a pram. It's like a little fancy stroller. I will have shown you a picture of that in class, okay? It was black with white stripes along its length. So we're still talking about the snozcumber now, this gruesome vegetable. It was black with white stripes along its length, and it was covered all over with coarse knobbles, like bumps. Page 50.
Here is the repulsant snozcumber, cried the BFG, waving it about. Ugh, I squoggle it. Ugh, I despise it. I despunge it. But because I is refusing to cobble up human beings like the other giants, I must spend my life guzzling up this icky-poo snozcumber instead. If I don't, I will be nothing but skin and groans.
You mean skin and bones, Sophie said.
Oh, I know it's bones, the BFG said, but please understand that I cannot be helping it if I sometimes is saying things a little squiggly. I is trying my very best all the time.
The big friendly giant looked suddenly so forlorn that Sophie got quite upset. Oh, I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to be rude.
There never was any schools to teach me talking in giant country, the BFG said sadly.
But couldn't your mother have taught you? Sophie asked.
My mother? Cried the BFG. Giants don't have mothers. Surely you're knowing that.
Oh, I did not know that, Sophie said.
Who ever heard of a woman giant? shouted the BFG, waving the snozzcumber around his head like a lasso. There never was a woman giant, and there never will be one. Giants is always men.
Sophie felt herself getting a little muddled, a little confused. Well, in that case, she said, how are you born?
Giants isn't born, the BFG answered. Giants appears. That's all there is to it. They simply appears the same way as the sun and the stars.
And when did you appear? Sophie asked.
Now, how on earth would I be knowing a thing like that? Said the BFG. It was so long ago I couldn't count.
You mean that you don't even know how old you are?
No giant is knowing that, the BFG said. All I is knowing about is that I is very old. Very, very old and crumply. Perhaps as old as the earth.
Well, what happens when a giant dies? Sophie asked.
Giants is never dying, the BFG answered. Sometimes, and quite suddenly, a giant is disappearing and nobody is ever knowing where he goes to. But mostly us giants is just simply going on and on like whiffsy time twiddlers.
The BFG was still holding the awesome snozzcumber in his right hand, and now he put one end into his mouth and bit off a huge hunk of it. He started crunching it up, and the noise it made was like the crunching of lumps of ice.
That's filthing,
he sputtered, speaking with a mouthful and spraying large pieces of snozzcumbers like bullets in Sophie's direction. Sophie hopped around on the tabletop, ducking out of the way.
That is disgusterous, the BFG gurgled. It's sickable. It's rotsome. It's maggot-wise. Try it yourself, this foulsome snozzcumber.
Ooh, no thank you, Sophie said, backing away.
That's all you're going to be guzzling around here from now on, so you might as well get used to it, said the BFG. Go on, you snipsy little winkle. Have a go.
Sophie took a small nibble.
She sputtered. Oh, no, oh, gosh, oh, help. She spat it out quickly. Oh, it tastes like frog skins. Ugh, he gasped. And rotten fish. Worse than that, cried the BFG, roaring with laughter. To me it is tasting of clock roaches and slime wanglers.
Page 52. Oh, do we really have to eat it? Sophie said.
You do unless you is wanting to begin so big. You do unless you is wanting to become so thin you will be disappearing into thick ear.
Into thin air, Sophie said. A thick ear is something quite different. Once again, he had that sad, winsome the sad, winsome look came into the BFG's eyes.
Words, he said, is such a twitch-tickling problem to me all my life. So you must simply just try to be patient and stop squibbling. As I am telling you before, I know exactly what words I am wanting to say, but somehow or another they is always getting squiggled around.
Oh, that happens to everyone, Sophie said.
Not like it happens to me, the BFG said. I is speaking the most terrible Wiglish.
Well, I think you speak beautifully, Sophie said.
You do?
Cried the BFG, suddenly brightening.
You really do?
Simply beautifully, Sophie repeated.
Well, that is the nicest present anybody has ever given me in my whole life, cried the BFG. Are you sure you're not twiddling my leg?
Of course not, Sophie said. I just love the way you talk.
No, how wonder-crump, cried the BFG, still beaming. How whopsy splunkers! How absolutely squiffling! I is all a stutter. Oh.
Listen, Sophie said. We don't have to eat snozzcumbers. In the fields around our village, there are all sorts of lovely vegetables, like cauliflower and carrots. Why don't you just come get some of those next time you go visiting?" The BFG raised his head proudly in the air.
"I am a very honorable giant," he said. "I would rather be chewing up rotsome snozcumbers than snitching things from other people."
"Well, you stole me," Sophie said.
"Well, I did not steal you very much," said the BFG, smiling gently. "After all, you was only a tiny little girl." Page 55. Ooh, yikes. The blood bottler. Do we dare? Do we dare? Let's see. Nah, we'll wait. Enjoy.